Now, to understand why these religious leaders were so opposed to Akhenaton in announcing this change, this switch from polytheism to monotheism, let's just stick with monotheism, is that, well, you need some insight into what life is like in a polytheistic society. I mean, like I had said earlier, would you rather keep track of 2,000 gods if you're a religious leader and your job is to keep track of gods? Would you rather keep track of 2,000 gods or keep track of one god? Well, you'd rather keep track of 2,000, and why? Because in a polytheistic system, the most important thing to know is what god does what thing. That's the most important thing to know. Which god does which thing. Let's just say you got a hangnail on your right thumb. And you want to offer a sacrifice to the god who gives you hangnails on your right thumb so that he'll make your thumb heal and you won't get, it'll heal. And it's starting to bother you and it cuts down into the quick and, you just got to do something about it. So you decide you're going to offer a sacrifice to the god who gives you hangnails on your right thumb. And so you go out in your backyard and you grab your chicken and you head down to the temple with your chicken. You're going to go into the temple. You're going to go up to the altar. You're going to take a knife and slit the chicken's neck and sprinkle blood all over the altar. And then you'll make the god who gives you hangnails on your right thumb happy. And then maybe he'll help your nail heal. Okay. But you mess up. You go in your backyard and you grab your chicken. You head down to the temple, but you make a mistake. And instead of offering your chicken to the god who gives you hangnails on your right thumb, you end up offering your chicken to the god who gives you hangnails on your left thumb. Well, you wasted a perfectly good chicken, and you probably ticked off the god who gives you hangnails on your left thumb because you got him confused with the one who gives you hangnails on your right thumb. And then you got, so he's going to give you a hangnail on your left thumb. Meanwhile, you also ticked off the god who gives you hangnails on your right thumb because you got that god confused with the god who gives you hangnails on your left thumb. So the right thumb god is going to reach down and yank on that hangnail even more. Well, you've got a big problem. So how do you solve the problem? Well, you got a hangnail on your right thumb. You say, this is bugging me. I got to do something about it. You go in your backyard. You grab a chicken. You head down to the temple. But before you go in and slit the chicken's throat and all that business, you stop by the information desk, where there's a nice religious leader there, ready to greet you. And you say, I got a hangnail on my right thumb. Who do I offer this chicken to? Because the religious leader has that knowledge. The religious leader knows. Ordinary people like you and me, we can't keep track of 2,000 gods. We got jobs. We got families to raise. We got personal issues to deal with. We don't have time to deal with keeping track of 2,000 gods. The religious leaders are the ones who are experts. They're the ones who know about the 2,000 gods. They're the experts. And so you go to the expert, and you ask the expert for the expert information. Which god do I offer my chicken to? And the religious leader thinks for half a second and says, offer your chicken to this god. And you say, thank you very much. And the religious leader says, that'll be $5 for the information fee. Yeah. Because it makes sense to pay that $5 for the information fee. Because the expert has the expert knowledge. And experts get paid for their knowledge. And it makes sense. I mean, you have some options. You could just grab a chicken from your backyard and offer your chicken to one of the gods and hope you hit the right one. 1 in 2,000 odds. Cheap. Not very effective. You could go in your backyard and grab 2,000 chickens and offer one to each of the gods. Guaranteed effectiveness, but awful expensive. It just makes a lot more sense to pay $5 information fee to the expert and get the expert answer, and then you can go on and hit the right god. Okay? But when we make this shift to monotheism or even henotheism, the point's the same. The broader point's the same. If we make this change to monotheism, then it's a no-brainer. Who do you offer your chicken to? Got a hangnail on your right thumb? Offer it to Aton. You got a hangnail on your left thumb? Offer it to Aton. Rains too much? Offer your chicken to Aton. Rains too little? Offer your chicken to Aton. As it turns out, Aton is pretty much a mean god too. I mean, like I said, not much changes. It's not like Aton is some kind of a nice guy kind of god, okay? He's a pretty mean guy, too. So when something bad happens to you, you know who to offer your chicken to. Aton. It's a no-brainer. And you walk right past the expert at the information desk, and you keep your $5 information fee in your pocket, and you're happy and good to go. The expert knowledge that these religious leaders had was now useless. It was like the knowledge of how to be the best VCR repair man in the universe 30 years ago. Okay? Well, now that information is useless, all right? You're not going to make much money, okay? Well, I don't know. Maybe you could charge $200 to fix the one VCR machine that somebody really wants to keep or something like that. But, well, I think you get what I'm getting at. Akhenaton had taken away their expertise, all right? And these religious leaders, they hated Akhenaton. I mean, I didn't play it up enough for you, but this information fee, let's call it, is a lot of money. I mean, that's the main source of income. And Akhenaton has taken this away from these religious leaders. Well, eventually Akhenaton dies, and he leaves behind a son with one of his wives besides Nefertiti. That's not terribly important. But a son who will become pharaoh behind him. At the time that Akhenaton dies, at the time that Akhenaton dies, this son, the new prince, the young prince, is only 9 years old, too young to actually rule as pharaoh. And so the religious leaders go to the royal family, and they say, give us the young prince, give us the young pharaoh. We'll raise him. We'll raise him to worship all the gods like we did back in the old days. And for whatever reason, the royal family agreed and turned over, I guess we'd say today, legal guardianship of the young prince, the young pharaoh, to the religious leaders. And of course now the religious leaders have the power of the pharaoh. And so you know what happened. The next day by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a line forming outside the information desk to find out which of these 2,000 gods that we used to worship, that now we're worshiping again, is the one for me to offer my chicken to as a sacrifice. And these religious leaders hated Akhenaton. They wanted everyone to forget he'd ever lived. They went through the history books and tore out the pages where his name appeared. They went to places where his name was chiseled on the wall, and they took another chisel and chiseled his name off the wall. They wanted everybody to forget that Akhenaton had ever lived, and to forget about this crazy monotheism idea. In fact, for a long time, this story was lost to us. I mean, we got bits and pieces of it. We could see the broad outline of what had happened, but we didn't have nearly the detail that we have today. And that's because, and that shouldn't surprise us really, because there's an awful lot of empty blind spots in Egyptian history. One of the things that the Egyptians were very good at was keeping records. What they were very bad at was keeping records of bad things. You don't write down that bad things happened. And so the scribes who keep the royal histories write down all the good things. And so bad things that happen just don't get written down. And so this story was lost to us for a long time. But the only way we know that story is because of that young pharaoh, who grows up, or I'm not sure what he thought himself. He named one of his own children with the ending syllable of the name Aten, which indicates that he still believed what his father had believed, whatever the religious leaders were forcing him to do. So we don't know what he really believed as he grew up, but we know that this young prince he had his father's story written down and buried with him. And today he's one of the most famous pharaohs of Egypt of all time. Not because of anything he did, because he was a very weak pharaoh, because the religious leaders who raised him essentially told him what to do. He's a very weak pharaoh. He didn't really ever do anything. What's famous about him is that, well, I'll give you his name. Maybe you can tell me. Akhenaton's son, Tutankhamun, or King Tut. You may have heard of King Tut. Tutankhamun, or King Tut, he's called popularly. Probably the most famous pharaoh by name. And he's not famous because of anything he did, because he really never did anything. But he's famous because his grave was one of the few graves in Egypt that the grave robbers didn't break into and steal stuff out of. Well, until the archaeologists broke into it and stole stuff out of it. But at least when the archaeologists stole stuff out of it, they put it in a museum so we could look at it. And he became very famous because we found everything he was buried with. And among the things he was buried with was the story of his father, of his father's religious thought. And he had it written down by a scribe at the palace, I'm assuming, and buried with him because he wanted to keep it with him as he went into the afterlife. And it's because of this young prince who never really did much that a big blind spot in Egyptian history was filled in. And it's during this time, the lifetime of Akhenaton, that we see this change in the visual arts. Now we're back to those three pieces that I showed you earlier. The bust of Queen Nefertiti to the left, that carving of Akhenaton and his family at the bottom, and that painting at the top. Three examples of this very different type of Egyptian art. The type of art that we call Amarna art. That word Amarna is just the name of a city in Egypt. It's a city in Egypt. Amarna is a city in Egypt where Akhenaton had a new temple built to honor Aten. And so a lot of artists went there to hang out. And so that's where we find an awful lot of art from this very short time period, only a generation, when we see this very different style of art. I'd like you to remember that name, Amarna art, that refers to this very different type of artwork. I'd like you to recognize the bust of Queen Nefertiti as an example of the visual representation of this very brief time of rapid cultural change. It's a very famous statue. It's a very famous picture of a beautiful woman. And it's more than just famous because it's Egyptian, because there's all kinds of Egyptian stuff. In fact, this doesn't even look like typical Egyptian stuff. And it's famous not because she's a beautiful woman, although she is quite a beautiful woman. She's famous because it's during her life that there's a story that happens. A story that involves her and involves her husband and involves an entire nation's culture. And so when you see it or see representations of it, I don't want you to say, oh, that's that Egyptian lady. I want you to say, oh, that's Queen Nefertiti. I remember a story about the time that she lived in, about her husband and what her husband attempted to do. I tell you this story because it's part of the history of Egyptian culture. I also tell you the story because it's kind of a cool story. But I also tell you the story because it's during this time that we see a dramatic change in Egyptian religion, that we see a dramatic change in the visual arts. And I suggest to you that that's not a coincidence, that all the different parts of a culture are related to each other, and that when we change one part of a culture, we see changes in other parts of the culture. Just like our own lives. When we change things about our lives, then we see resulting changes in other parts of our lives. And in that sense, cultures are kind of like lives. Like our own lives.